my ex-husband invited me to his wedding, not because he wanted me there, but because he wanted to humiliate me. And somehow, I knew that before I even opened the envelope. Still, nothing could have prepared anyone for what happened next. Because the entire ceremony went silent the moment I arrived, stepping out of a Rolls-Royce with our twins by my side. And in that moment, every single person there realized this story wasn't going to go the way he had planned. My name is Adriana Keller. And 5 years ago, the man I once called my husband walked away from me like I meant nothing. And I remember that day too clearly, the way I cried, begged him not to leave, barely able to breathe through the panic tightening in my chest, while he just stood there, looking at me like I was already gone, like I had already disappeared from his life. He told me I had failed as a wife, that I had no money, no value, that I couldn't even give him children, that I was dragging him down, and that he deserved someone better, someone who could give him the life he thought he was owed. And then, just like that, he left. Without hesitation, without looking back, leaving me alone in an apartment that suddenly felt chujim, empty, almost unreal. I had nothing left. No support, no stability, no sense of who I was anymore. But what Damien never knew was that later that same night, my hands were shaking as I stared at a pregnancy test. And when I saw the result, positive, everything changed. Because I wasn't just pregnant, I was carrying twins. And from that moment on, time didn't just move forward, I moved with it. Even though the pain didn't disappear, it transformed into something quieter, sharper, something that refused to break. Determination. I focused on the only thing I had ever truly been good at, cooking. And I started small, with a street cart, selling simple food just to survive. But people came back, and then they brought others. And slowly, almost without me realizing it, one cart turned into a small restaurant, then another, and eventually into something I never could have imagined. A chain across the country. Today, I'm a millionaire. But I never changed the way I lived. I stayed quiet, private, almost invisible, because I learned that real power doesn't need to be loud, and only my family knew the truth. And then one day, an envelope arrived, and the moment I saw the name, I felt something tighten in my chest. Damien. He was getting married to Vivian, the daughter of a powerful businessman. And the invitation wasn't really an invitation at all. It was a message, wrapped in politeness but filled with arrogance, telling me he'd love for me to come so I could finally see what a real wedding looked like, surrounded by real wealth. Even offering to pay for my bus ticket, as if I were still that woman he had left behind. I could feel the insult in every word. Because he didn't want me there as a guest, he wanted me there as proof that he had won and I had failed. That his version of the story was the only one that mattered. He expected me to sit quietly while his world judged me. So I said yes. On the day of the wedding, the venue looked like something out of a dream. A luxury coastal hotel with gardens stretching toward the Pacific. Everything polished, expensive, almost too perfect to be real. With women shimmering in designer dresses and men standing in tailored suits, laughing like nothing in the world could ever touch them. And for a moment, it all felt distant. Like I was watching someone else's life from the outside. Until everything shifted again, and my thoughts pulled me back through the years. Because time had moved forward, and so had I. Even though the pain never truly disappeared, it changed, hardened into something quieter and stronger, into determination. I remembered how, for the first 3 years, my restaurant barely survived. How I worked through exhaustion and doubt, and those endless days when it felt like everything might collapse at any second. But by the 5th year, everything was different, because what had started as a small street cart had grown into something real, then bigger, then impossible to ignore. Until my brand, Stia Adriana, was recognized across the country, praised by critics for its authenticity, noticed by investors, written about in culinary magazines. And still, despite all of it, I stayed out of the spotlight, building everything quietly and carefully, protecting my children from a world that only pays attention when it's already too late. So to everyone else, I was just another hard-working restaurant owner, modest, ordinary, almost invisible, and only my closest family knew the truth. And then one day, that envelope arrived. And the moment I saw the handwriting, I knew exactly who it was from. Damien. And I felt something tighten in my chest in a way I hadn't felt in years. Because inside was a wedding invitation, heavy and embossed in gold, deliberate in every detail, announcing that he was marrying Vivienne Laurent, the daughter of a powerful real estate magnate. And of course he was, because that was always the kind of life he believed he deserved. And the message inside made it impossible to ignore his intention, telling me he'd be happy if I attended, that maybe I would finally see what a real wedding looked like. And I might have dismissed it if not for the last line, the one that stayed with me longer than it should have. Don't worry about transportation. I'll gladly cover your bus ticket. And I remember staring at those words, realizing that it wasn't an invitation at all. It was a performance. Because he didn't want me there as a guest. He wanted me there as a reminder of who I used to be, of where he believed I had stayed, imagining me sitting quietly in the back, watching his life unfold without me, watching him win. And I held that invitation in my hands for a long time before making my decision, knowing I would be there, but not as the woman he left behind. That morning, standing in my bedroom overlooking the ocean, the light soft and calm around me, I could hear Elias and Alara laughing behind me, running across the bed like nothing in the world could ever touch them. And for a moment, I just stood there watching them, letting that sound ground me, before my mind drifted back again to that night, to the silence after he left, to the way the apartment felt too big and too empty, to the moment I slid down onto the wooden floor, unable to stand, surrounded by a kind of quiet that felt like it could swallow me whole. And then later, standing alone in the bathroom with a pregnancy test in my hands, my fingers trembling so badly I had to sit on the edge of the tub just to steady myself, watching as 2 pink lines appeared almost instantly, clear, unmistakable, permanent. And realizing in that moment that I wasn't just pregnant, I was carrying twins. And for a brief second, fear drowned everything else. Because I had no money, no partner, no plan. But slowly something else began to take shape. Something stronger than fear. A quiet and unshakable resolve. Because Damien had always seen me as weak, as someone without value simply because I didn't have wealth. But he never understood that strength doesn't reveal itself when life is easy. It's born in the moments when everything else is taken from you. And so I turned to the one thing that had always been mine, cooking. The one place that had always felt like refuge, where flavors could speak when words failed. And with the last money I had, I bought a small street cart. And on the first day, I sold only 6 plates, just 6. But by the second week, people were already lining up before I even opened, because word had started to spread about the woman who cooked quietly, intensely, like every dish mattered. And every dollar I earned went straight back into the business as I slept little, worked endlessly, and raised my children with a determination that left no room for doubt. And when my twins were born, I named them Elias and Alara. And they became my reason, my anchor, even as the balance between motherhood and survival felt brutal at times. With nights when I rocked one child to sleep with one hand while stirring sauce with the other. Exhaustion following me everywhere, but never stopping me. And now, 5 years later, stood in front of the mirror preparing to walk into a life Damien believed I could never reach. Not as his past, but as something he would never expect. The venue shimmered under the California sun, a luxury coastal hotel with gardens stretching toward the Pacific, where the waves broke softly against marble terraces. White floral arches framing the ceremony space, while champagne flowed like water and, somewhere near a reflecting pool, a string quartet played something delicate and almost forgettable. And everything looked perfect, almost too perfect, until the moment the Rolls-Royce pulled up to the entrance. And at first, only a few heads turned out of simple curiosity, because people expect luxury at a wedding like this, but they don't expect surprises. And then the driver stepped out, precise and controlled, moving with that quiet professionalism that draws attention without asking for it as he opened my door. And the music didn't stop but softened, hesitating just enough to be noticed. And when I stepped onto the stone path, the sunlight caught the silk of my dress and reflected just enough to make people look twice. And then I turned and reached back. And Elias stepped out first, steady, confident, his small hand already carrying a quiet certainty, followed by Alara, holding tightly to her brother's fingers, her eyes observant. And that was the moment everything changed, because the silence didn't fall all at once, but spread like ripples across water. Conversations breaking mid-sentence, laughter fading, even the quartet faltering for a second before continuing slightly off rhythm. And I walked forward with measured, calm steps, my children beside me. Not looking around for Damien, because I didn't need to, since he found me. And I saw him near the aisle beside a tall floral arrangement, adjusting the cuff of his custom ivory suit before suddenly freezing, the color draining from his face the instant recognition hit. His eyes moving almost immediately to the children as Elias met his gaze without hesitation or fear. And the resemblance was undeniable. Not subtle, not something anyone could question or explain away, but clear, immediate, unavoidable. And I could feel the shift move through the crowd in whispers that started low and spread quickly, people asking who I was, why the children looked like him, whether it could really be what they thought. And then Vivian turned, draped in lace and diamonds, glowing under the attention she had been waiting for all day, until that exact moment. Her eyes following Damien's gaze until they landed on me and then on the children. And I watched, almost calmly, as something in her expression changed. Not confusion, but understanding. The kind that arrives too quickly and settles too deeply. And still I kept walking, neither rushing nor slowing, every step deliberate. Because this was never about humiliation. Not really. It was about truth. And some truths don't need to be spoken out loud. They only need to be seen. I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't need to, because I hadn't come there to argue or accuse anyone. I simply stood there. And somehow that was enough. because my presence, the children beside me, the way Elias held his head just slightly the way Damien always did, the way Alara's eyes carried that same sharp, unmistakable intensity. It all said everything, louder than words ever could, and I could see the guests looking from me to him and back again, trying to piece it together, trying to understand something no one had prepared them for, while Damien still hadn't moved, as if his body hadn't caught up with reality yet, his lips parting slightly like he wanted to say something, anything. But nothing came out, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked unsure. Then Vivian stepped closer to him, not dramatically, not like in movies. Just one small step. But I noticed how her hand didn't reach for his, how her posture shifted ever so slightly, creating that quiet kind of distance that appears the moment trust begins to crack. And when she finally spoke, asking, "What is this?" her voice wasn't loud. But in that silence, it didn't need to be. And no one answered, because the answer was already there. Standing in front of them, breathing, real, unavoidable. I felt Alara's fingers tighten around mine, and for a moment I looked down at her, gently brushing her hand with my thumb as I whispered, "It's okay." And I meant it. Not for them, but for us. Before lifting my gaze again, calm and steady, and saying quietly, "I didn't come here to ruin anything." My voice unwavering. "I came because I was invited." And after a brief pause, I added, "I thought you deserved to see the life you walked away from." And you could feel those words land, not like an explosion, but like something heavy settling into place. Finally, Damien took a step forward, slow and careful, like he was approaching something fragile or dangerous. And when he said, "Adriana," my name sounded unfamiliar in his voice, like it no longer belonged to him. His eyes drifting back to the children, and this time, not leaving them, as he tried to speak again. How, but couldn't finish, and I didn't help him, didn't explain. Because some things don't need explanations. They need acknowledgement, so I simply said, "They're yours." The words simple, clean, final. And another silence followed, deeper this time, because now there was no space left for doubt. And I watched something break behind his eyes. Not loudly, not in a way everyone else could see, but I saw it. Regret, late and heavy and useless. And for a brief second, my mind returned to that night, to the empty apartment, the silence, the fear, everything I had survived alone. Everything he had chosen not to see, and standing there now, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. I hadn't come for revenge, and I hadn't even come for closure. I had come because I no longer needed either. Because the truth was already doing what it always does, revealing everything, without ever asking for permission. "Yes," I said quietly. And Elias looked at me for a moment, thinking the way he always does before asking, "Then why didn't he know about us?" And I gently brushed a loose strand of hair away from his forehead, letting my fingers linger for just a second as I answered softly, "Because sometimes people only see what's convenient for them." And he didn't ask anything else, because he didn't need to. And as the Rolls-Royce pulled away from the ceremony, I realized I didn't feel any triumph or satisfaction in what had just happened. Only a quiet kind of peace. The kind I hadn't known 5 years ago when I was sitting on that cold apartment floor surrounded by a silence that felt endless. Because back then, I had nothing. And now I had everything that truly mattered. Not because of him, but in spite of him. Outside the window, the ocean stretched endlessly as we drove along the coast, sunlight flickering across the glass. while in the back seat, Elias and Alara were already softly arguing about what dessert they wanted that evening. Something simple, something normal. Life moving forward the way it always does. And somewhere behind us, the wedding remained unfinished, frozen between illusion and truth. But I didn't look back because there was nothing left for me there. Before we reached the highway, I turned slightly toward the children and asked gently, "Are you both okay?" And Elias nodded while Alara squeezed my hand and said, "We're okay, Mom." And I believed them, even though I knew that back at the ceremony, everything had likely unraveled the moment we left. I hadn't seen it myself, but I didn't need to because I could imagine it clearly. Guests leaving in hushed voices, the music fading into an awkward silence, champagne glasses abandoned half full on silver trays, and Damien standing there alone, watching the life he had so carefully constructed come apart in front of everyone. I didn't go back because there was nothing left to say. But just as I was getting into the car, I heard my name and turned to see Vivienne walking toward me. Her expression changed, the sharpness gone and replaced by something quieter, something more real. And when she asked softly, "You built your life without him?" I simply answered, "Yes." And she glanced at the car, at the children, at everything I hadn't needed to prove before asking, "And he never gave you anything?" And a small smile touched my lips as I said, "Real success is quiet. When it's real, it doesn't need to be shown." And she nodded slowly, as if she understood more than she expected to, as if she had just learned something she wouldn't forget. When I got back into the car, Elias looked at me again and asked, "Is that man really our father?" And I met his eyes and answered, "Yes," before adding after a brief pause, "And that's enough." And as I leaned back and felt the car move forward, the road opening up ahead of us, I realized that for the first time since that day, since he walked away, I finally felt whole. Not because he had finally seen my worth, but because I always had. And this time, that was enough.